An American helicopter bearing the Red Cross emblem enters Egyptian airspace. Dr. Rachel Scott, leading the mission, is given 5 minutes to examine the residents of a village where, according to preliminary reports, all have been infected with an unknown virus for which there is no cure. The situation is dire, but Dr. Scott cannot help the sick. The only thing she can do is take blood samples to help determine the virus's origin. 3 months later, Rachel Scott and her colleague Quincy Toffett arrive at a naval base and load laboratory equipment. On to the destroyer James, the ship's official mission assigned by Admiral Tom Chandler is an Arctic expedition to study migratory birds. The destroyer spends several weeks in Arctic waters under strict radio silence. Finally, Chandler begins preparing the crew for their return home. Unexpectedly, Rachel refuses to halt her experiments and asks for more time. When her request is backed by an order from the White House, Chandler begins to suspect the mission involves more than just birds. At last, Rachel discovers what she came for. Buried in the ice, as if responding to her triumphant cry, several Russian military helicopters appear over the expedition's camp. Toad urges Rachel to abandon the freezer with her samples and flee, but she refuses and secures the critical specimens. Chandler's subordinates quickly respond to the enemy attack, shooting down the helicopters that open fire on the destroyer. One injured attacker is brought aboard to learn who sent them and why. The man only manages to utter something about a cure before succumbing. Following the incident, Chandler demands Rachel tell him the full truth about her mission, threatening to throw her sample case overboard if she refuses. Rachel has no choice but to confess. She explains the virus first appeared 7 months ago near Cairo. Initially, the infection and deaths were localized there, but while the Nathan James was at sea, the disease spread globally, infecting over 90% of the population. Attempts to identify the strain from patient samples failed, leading scientists to the Arctic in search for the original virus. Now Rachel has found it, but it seems she isn't the only one pursuing this goal to confirm her claims. The Speaker of the House, now acting as a substitute for the deceased president, contacts Chandler. She informs him that the government has lost many members, and the world's only hope lies with Dr. Rachel Scott, who may be able to develop a cure. The Speaker provides Chandler with the coordinates of a secure biolab on the North Carolina coast and requests he navigate the ship. There, Chandler assembles the crew on deck to inform them of the situation. He also announces that their mission is extended indefinitely, requiring them to find fuel and supplies to sustain the ship until a cure is developed. Chandler opens communication channels so the crew can contact their families. The news is grim. Most receive no response, while those who do learn of the infection and loss of loved ones. An unidentified vessel appears on the radar, but attempts to establish contact fail. Chandler orders a small team to board the ship, recover supplies and fuel if the ship is abandoned. Dr. Rachel Scott joins the mission, warning the team to remain in helmets at all times. The virus is airborne, and any exposure could result in infection. Their fears are confirmed. The entire crew of the Italian vessel was infected, and only corpses remain. However, amidst the lifeless bodies, Chandler spots an elderly man still showing faint signs of life, while Rachel takes a sample from the old man's head. Below deck, to retrieve supplies from the kitchen, one of them stumbles on. The sailor loses his mask and falls dangerously close to a deceased crew member. The sailor realizes that his chances of avoiding infection are almost non-existent. Ignoring orders from his superiors, he pulls the trigger, ending his life. Admiral Chandler attempts to contact the bunker, but neither the Speaker nor her colleagues respond. The last message from the government was sent to the ship 5 days ago. However, Chandler receives a message from his wife. She informs him that she and the children are safe in hiding in the rural home of Chandler's father as the destroyer approaches the shore. The executive officer orders a team to prepare for a reconnaissance mission to assess the situation on land. Chandler changes the plan, announcing that they will not go ashore because the U.S. government is no longer responding to their new. The target is the military base at Guantanamo Bay, where they are likely to refuel and resupply. The crew is surprised by the captain's decision, but they follow his orders without question. Only Dr. Quincy Toit secretly uses a service phone to make a panicked call, reporting to someone that the destroyer has changed course. Fett tries to convince his colleague Rachel to rest, promising to take over her duties when the team lands in Guantanamo to retrieve the necessary supplies. Meanwhile, Chandler trains the sailors, aware that the military base may present significant danger. The destroyer enters the bay, and Chandler sends out a reconnaissance helicopter, which reports no signs of life at the base. The admiral orders 3 teams to be assembled, one of which he leads personally to inspect the food and fuel depots and retrieve critical laboratory equipment. He continues to hope Rachel will stay aboard the ship, and Chandler supports the scientist in this, insisting both researchers remain in full safety. The teams discover bodies on the base showing clear signs of infection. Despite this, they proceed with their tasks, while one group connects the ship to a refueling station and another searches the medical block, collecting everything necessary for vaccine development. Chandler's team surveys the base and unexpectedly spots an armed man. The stranger panics and rushes toward them, shouting for them to move back immediately. A vehicle explodes in front of the team, but thanks to the stranger's warning, everyone escapes unharmed. The man removes his goggles and introduces himself as Tex Nolan, a prison guard who has been hiding for weeks from both the virus and a gang of criminals responsible for the explosion. Chandler warns the crew on the ship about the approaching dangerous group, but the signal comes too late. The terrorists attack the destroyer before refueling is complete. Mike Slattery, the executive officer, takes command and manages to neutralize the attackers in a single decisive strike. Nolan offers his assistance to the Marines and leads them to the food depot, where they discover the body of one of his colleagues at the same time another team comes. Under fire, despite the risks, Chandler refuses to retreat. His team infiltrates the food storage facility, where armed terrorists are waiting for them. Several team members are injured, and Rachel loses patience. She requests permission from Slattery to leave the ship and assist the wounded when it seems the threat has passed. Nolan is captured by the criminals. The terrorists demand that the Marines leave all the food they've gathered, hand over their research, and vacate the base, unwilling to negotiate with terrorists. Chandler relays the building's coordinates to the ship, and moments later an explosion erupts. Taking advantage of the confusion, the soldiers eliminate the criminals, clearing the way. To the provisions, the destroyer prepares to set sail, and Chandler is confident they have accomplished their mission and now must simply wait for the cure to be developed unexpectedly. Nathan James is contacted by a British military ship that happens to be nearby. The crew eagerly prepares to welcome their British allies, hoping to find reliable partners in their challenging mission. However, as the ship draws closer, it becomes clear that it is a trap. Rather than British colleagues, a Russian vessel is approaching the destroyer. Nathan James finds himself in the enemy's crosshairs. In this time, Chandler must negotiate with his adversary. Captain Rusov proposes a deal. He wants the original virus strain and promises to let the destroyer leave unharmed in return. Chandler counters by suggesting a face-to-face meeting to discuss the terms. He takes Dr. Tet with him to ensure the Russians understand the significance of the vaccine. The team lands in Cuba, but before negotiations begin, Chandler insists that Tet test Rusov for the virus only after confirming the Russian. The captain is healthy. Do the Americans remove their protective suits? Rusov reiterates his demand. He wants the original virus sample and Dr. Rachel Scott along with all her research. Chandler offers the virus samples but refuses to hand over Rachel. The tension escalates, and to protect his colleagues, Todt steps forward. He offers to stay with the Russians and develop a separate vaccine for them, but Ruskov rejects it. In the proposal, returning to Nathan James, Chandler learns that during his meeting with Rusov, the port exit was blocked. The team begins devising an alternative escape plan, but Chandler reassures Rachel, asking her to focus on the cure. The destroyer fires a warning shot, and Chandler urges Rusov to reconsider and allow them to leave peacefully. The Russian captain is displeased but reluctantly agrees, maintaining one condition. Chandler has 24 hours to hand over Rachel, or Rusov will launch a missile. Unaware of the looming threat, Dr. Rachel Scott continues her work. Suddenly, she is confronted by an armed thug who orders her to follow him. Without question, Rachel manages to escape and runs to the mess hall to call for help. The traitor is immediately targeted by Marines, but he counters by grabbing a vial of the virus and threatening to release it. Rachel engages him in conversation, and as soon as the vial is safely in her hands, the Marines apprehend him. During interrogation, the traitor confesses he was working for the Russians to save his family, who are being held hostage. Chandler devises a new plan, and sends Sergeant Green to the location where the meeting was supposed to rendezvous with the Russians instead of Rachel. Sergeant Foster accompanies Green posing as defectors. Meanwhile, the destroyer crew disables the radars, preventing the Russians from tracking their movements. The plan works perfectly. Rusov remains unaware of the ship's movements, but spots Toit, who successfully commandeers a boat with his colleague and the virus samples. As they approach the Russian cruiser, Green and Foster open fire and accelerate the boat, which is rigged with explosives. The pair jump into the water seconds before the blast, inflicting significant damage on the enemy vessel. Taking advantage of the Russian distraction, Nathan James navigates through the coral reef and escapes the trap. The sergeants return to the ship, and the destroyer safely reaches open waters. Rosov leaves the bridge to visit his captive scientist, who is working on his own version of the cure. The destroyer sets course for Costa Rica, where a nature reserve provides the perfect site for Rachel to test the vaccine. For now, Rachel continues her work in solitude, holding on to hope that she will soon announce a breakthrough at one point. Rachel comes close to a breakthrough, but conducting clinical trials alone proves impossible. She asks the Admiral to release Ted, promising to ensure that the mutineer doesn't repeat his past mistakes. Rachel is allowed to visit her colleague in the brig to discuss their next steps. However, the conversation does not go well. Tote blames Rachel for the deaths of his entire family. Suddenly, the ship's power goes out, and Rachel forgets about her troubled companion. Her main concern now is the fate of the samples. If the refrigerator temperature rises, all her work will be irreversibly destroyed. The problem turns out to be serious. The Admiral orders the crew to focus all available energy on the lab to save Rachel's samples while seeking a long-term solution. Slattery is given a critical assignment as well. He is sent to the brig to convince Toad to assist Rachel in developing the cure. The traitor hesitates at first, but Slattery suggests trying an old shipboard punishment ritual, and Toad quickly changes his mind. A technician estimates that repairing the cooling system and water filter will take at least a week. Additionally, the destroyer must anchor in a safe location, since moving will cause the engine to overheat continuously. That night, Chandler halts the ship to allow the engine to fully cool. This naturally affects the crew's morale as well as the captain's, but a glimmer of hope emerges. Rachel announces that she has found the formula and now has a prototype vaccine. The hope of salvation is immediately threatened. The lab loses power again. Leaving the samples without refrigeration, the only option is to lower the container to the ocean floor, where it can remain cold. However, this means the destroyer must stay put until the engines are repaired, and the crew's fresh water supply won't last for the duration. Chandler decides to take the risk and proceed with the plan. The crew is relieved that the samples are preserved, but remains anxious about what will happen if the water runs out before repairs are complete. As the crew approaches the brink of survival, the wind finally picks up. The captain orders the deployment of parachutes, creating a makeshift sail to help power the engine. Nathan James begins moving again, but conditions on board remain dire. None of the crew has had drinking water for over 2 days. The communications team attempts to contact nearby ships in the hope of receiving help, but no signals come through. The sailors begin to lose not only consciousness, but also hope. Just when all seems lost, the captain spots a small island. The sight reinvigorates the crew, and within hours they land ashore to rest and quench their thirst. That evening, the crew organizes a bonfire party on the beach, savoring a moment of reprieve. The ship resumes its journey toward the Costa Rican coast, but Slattery informs the captain that multiple distress signals are coming from the area. Coastal towns have been overrun by the virus and riots. A safe route into the jungle is no longer available. Chandler realizes it's too late to change their plan. They must capture several monkeys for testing, which means taking risks. Once again, 2 groups land in the reserve, and the Marines venture into the jungle to search for primates. Instead of monkeys, they encounter trouble, a crowd of infected locals pleading for help and blocking the expedition's path. The Marines are forced to retreat to the boats, escaping moments before the sick people reach them. Chandler, however, knows the monkeys are essential and steers his boat toward another part of the island to make another attempt. This time, the group avoids encountering the infected. But one of the sailors steps into a trap. In the same instant, an armed gang surrounds them, and Chandler's team is taken hostage. The captives are brought to the village leader, El Toro, who magnanimously agrees to save the sailor caught in the trap. However, the dictator has no intention of letting the Americans leave immediately. He invites Chandler to dinner to learn why the Americans have come to Costa Rica. Chandler is forced to explain to El Toro the purpose of the wooden crates and tranquilizers on his boat, assuring village leader that they need monkeys to study the virus. Surprisingly, the dictator agrees to help the visitors. His people capture the required number of monkeys, and the group prepares to return to the ship. However, leaving without consequences proves impossible. The crew decides to defend a local girl, turning from El Toro's allies into his enemies. Chandler negotiates for the release of Slattery and Green, but he has to leave behind all the equipment and protective suits as part of the deal with the dictator. Also warns the Marines that if they dare return, it will be the village girls who will pay the price. Slattery refuses to abandon the innocent villagers, and the crew returns to the island to rescue them. The Marines expertly take out the guards and infiltrate El Toro's stronghold. The dictator attempts to escape by taking his concubine hostage, but the girl's father eliminates the tyrant, taking his place as the new leader. The heroes return to the ship, having secured the necessary monkeys. As they pass the infected coastline, the Marines struggle to hold back their tears, but now they carry the hope that this nightmare might soon end back on the ship. Chandler informs his colleagues that they can now set a course for home. Rachel is about to test the vaccine on the monkeys, and they may soon be able to save those who have survived. To check on their progress, the captain visits the lab and asks Rachel about the trials. Rachel assures him she is doing everything possible, but cannot yet predict the outcome. Hearing this, the captain decides to share everything that happened in Costa Rica with the crew, including their encounter with the infected group. He expresses hope that they will soon save the world from the disease, but emphasizes that now it is time to head home. The first vaccine trial fails, the test monkeys die, leaving Rachel with only a few remaining specimens. Upon learning this, Chandler orders the crew to halt. If they need more monkeys, returning will no longer be an option. Sensing the ship has stopped, Tufa begins stirring dissent, manipulating his guard to turn against the captain and heightening tensions that night. Rachel sneaks onto the deck to dispose of the monkey bodies by throwing them overboard. She is spotted by on-duty sailors, raising doubts about her work even among Slattery. In the shared quarters, Green collapses to the floor unconscious. Chandler and Rachel rush to the scene, and the doctor begins examining him. She tries to keep panic at bay, reassuring everyone that Green could not have been infected. However, the ship's doctor insists on taking a blood sample to confirm. Despite Rachel Scott's assurances, Chandler decides to declare a quarantine. This announcement causes panic, and one of the sailors recalls Tophus's earlier claims that Chandler is hiding something. The captain receives the results of Green's test from the ship's doctor. Green is not contagious as he has contracted a different, non-threatening fever. Tophy continues sowing discord, convincing his guard that the monkeys Rachel disposed of were infected, putting everyone in grave danger as a result. 16 crew members file requests to leave, leaving the ship, citing safety concerns. Today hopes that Chandler will agree to let the sailors disembark, allowing him to escape with them. Chandler gathers the crew on the main deck. He admits that he hasn't been completely honest in recent days, but insists it was only to protect the team and to ensure there are no more secrets between them. The Admiral reveals Rachel's laboratory, where active research is ongoing. He hands the floor to Rachel, who acknowledges that her experiments sometimes fail despite this. She reassures the crew that she remains determined to find the correct solution. After Chandler's motivational speech, he announces that anyone who wishes to leave the ship is free to do so by 7 a.m. He promises to prepare a boat with fuel and provisions for those who choose to depart. True to his word, the commander readies the boat. However, those who were prepared to leave the day before now ask to be reinstated into the ranks of the Marines and retake their oaths. Chandler forgives his subordinates, but he refuses to forgive the man who started it all. He takes away Toit's only means of communication with his guards or anyone else. 6 months earlier in Oslo, Dr. Niels, the very scientist now aboard the Russian ship, met with his old mentor. He had been trying to convince the elder scientist to conduct an experiment by introducing an additional component into the virus when his mentor refused. The madman admitted it was already too late. He had conducted the experiment and injected himself with the modified virus. Now Niels is trying to fix the situation, but he cannot do so without Dr. Rachel Scott. Rachel continues her work and discovers an extra gene in the virus. She informs the captain that it is a human gene, meaning the disease was artificially created. But there's even worse news. Only 2 monkeys remain alive on the ship. The communications team scans radio frequencies, hoping to learn what is happening on the mainland. Instead, they pick up a distress signal from a girl named Beatrice, who was drifting in a boat nearby without food or fresh water. Dr. Scott insists they must rescue the girl. If she has survived where everyone else became infected and died, it could mean she has natural immunity, which would significantly aid the vaccine development. Chandler understands the danger of responding to their communications could be intercepted by any nearby vessel. Nevertheless, he takes responsibility and answers the radio. Nathan James sets course for the coordinates provided by Beatrice. Naturally, the Russian ship intercepts the conversation. Rusov orders his crew to investigate and intercept the Americans. 2 boats are deployed from the destroyer, quickly locating the vessel from which Beatrice's signals originated. However, the girl is nowhere to be seen. Slattery suspects a trap. He orders a helicopter to be launched, and they spot 2 more boats approaching the area from the opposite side. The Marines finally spot the frightened girl. They help her aboard their boat, but a pursuit ensues, and the Russians open fire. Thanks to Tex Nolan's quick thinking, Chandler's the team manages to escape. However, the captain notices their boat has been hit and will not make it back to the ship. He orders his companion change clothes and jump into the water, where they will wait for rescue back on Nathan. James Slattery puts T-Fed at the radio station, instructing him to monitor Russian communications and report anything critical hours later, still adrift in the water. Chandler decides to break protocol and use the radio to contact his ship. However, instead of asking for help, he orders the cancellation of all rescue operations and instructs the ship to continue its course. Beatrice is handed over to Dr. Rachel Scott. Meanwhile, the crew brainstorms a plan to save their captain. The Russians also intercept Chandler's message, prompting Rusov to deploy a drone to search for him. Hearing the familiar buzz, Chandler braces for detection. However, a missile fired from the Nathan James destroys the drone just in time. Rachel draws Beatrice's blood for detailed analysis. The initial results come almost immediately. Rachel's theory. It is confirmed the girl has natural immunity to all strains of the virus Nightfall, and Chandler and Nolan continue drifting in open water, unsure where the waves will carry them. Nathan James intercepts a signal from the Russian ship, and Tophet realizes that Rusov has not given up on finding the admiral. However, the Russians seem to suspect that Chandler may already be dead. Slattery refuses to give up. He orders the helicopter to be refueled and sent back into the sky. The entire crew anxiously watches the monitors until finally they detect movement. The helicopter locates Chandler and Nolan lowering a winch. Chandler is lifted first but faces disaster upon boarding. A group of armed Russians is waiting for him. The captives are taken to the Russian ship, where Chandler is brought directly to Ruskov, the captain. However, he refuses to cooperate, repeating only his name, rank, and service number. Meanwhile, Rachel demonstrates to Beatrice how the virus affects human cells versus her own. If Rachel's theory is correct, the girl's blood could be the key to the vaccine. Ruskov contacts the destroyer and demands that Slattery hand over Dr. Rachel Scott along with all samples and research. If he refuses, Captain Chandler will be executed. Rachel's vaccine, derived from Beatrice's blood and administered to a monkey, begins to work. The primate shows signs of recovery. Rachel informs the crew immediately, and upon hearing that Rusov is after the samples, she agrees to go to the Russian ship. Despite her bravery, the Americans decide to formulate a backup plan. They study the layout of the Russian cruiser and equip Rachel with a concealed weapon to defend herself and escape if necessary. Ruskov's men take Rachel aboard, searching both her and the case of samples. Fortunately, they miss the weapon hidden in the container's false bottom. She is allowed to check on the captives, and to everyone's surprise, Rachel throws herself into Chandler's arms and kisses him passionately. Afterward, Rachel is taken to the lab to meet Niels. She immediately realizes that the deranged biologist is not only the creator of the mutated virus, but also its patient zero. Rachel refuses to cooperate with the psychopath and demands to be taken back to Ruskov, back in his cell. Chandler retrieves a note Rachel slipped him during the kiss. When Ruskoff learns the truth about Neil's actions, he flies into a rage but decides to test Rachel's vaccine. He orders her to administer the drug to one of his officers, who is then sent into a cell with patient zero at the appointed time. Slattery instructs the crew to prepare for the rescue operation simultaneously. Chandler provokes a guard to approach. His cell overpowers him and takes the keys from the captives. Escape. Taking down two more guards and arming themselves. By this point, the team from the Nathan James has infiltrated the Russian ship and is preparing to rescue Rachel. In addition to freeing Rachel, Chandler also liberate Toit's family. Rusov discovers the escape and orders his men to act discreetly, but ensure the Americans do not leave the ship or take Dr. Scott. One of Ruskoff's subordinates tells Rachel to follow him, but she requests time to collect her samples in the lab. Rachel retrieves the hidden pistol and eliminates the officer. Chandler's team bursts into the lab and helps Rachel break free. The group regroups and moves toward the deck, where they plan to evacuate. Nathan James Chandler lowers a ladder, assisting the freed hostages onto a boat. However, the escape does not go unnoticed on Ruskoff's orders. The Russians open fire. Chaos and panic erupt on the Russian ship as an explosion rocks the deck. The crew flees blindly, failing to notice one unusual figure among them. Dr. Niels is blending in with the other sailors. Chandler, his team, and the freed prisoners return to the Nathan James. You know, no one hides their relief and joy at that reunion, knowing their mission is complete, and they can now set a course for home. Meanwhile, in Virginia, people are struggling to survive, resorting to hunting even in prohibited areas. Jed Chandler Sr., the Admiral's father, returns home to his grandchildren and daughter-in-law, Darion. He admits that today's catch was left with sick neighbors, so they'll have to make do with what little they have. Darren is unbothered, promising to visit the store tomorrow and pick up parts needed for a communication device. Rachel prepares a new laboratory for trials. She now requires volunteers willing to be infected with the virus and test the vaccine on themselves. Chandler insists that no crew member should risk their life, but his colleagues argue that this may be their only chance to test the drug. The Admiral relents but mandates that participation must be strictly voluntary and confidential. Surprisingly, many step forward as volunteers. Rachel selects candidates with different blood compositions and begins administering the vaccine prototype designed to generate antibodies to the virus. The volunteers are then placed in isolation where they are exposed to the virus under controlled conditions to observe how their bodies respond. Meanwhile, Darren sneaks into town to collect the necessary supplies for repairs. In the store, she hears voices outside. Looking through the window, she sees a marauder gang executing an infected woman. 6 hours into the trial, the first side effects. Emerging at first, the symptoms seem expected: fever and fatigue. However, Sergeant Foster suddenly loses consciousness and begins experiencing severe seizures. Doctors provide immediate care, but her temperature continues to climb. Rachel uses strong medication and ice packs to stabilize the patient. Now Rachel must determine why Foster's body reacted so severely to the vaccine and how to prevent similar outcomes in others. Another volunteer loses feeling in their fingers. Tex Nolan develops painful ulcers across his body and becomes extremely weak toed. Suspects the vaccine has failed or that the virus has mutated again, making the experiment flawed by nightfall. The situation worsens. Patients begin losing their sanity, and sedatives are required to prevent further outbreaks. One of the volunteers succumbs before doctors can intervene. Tote tries to convince Chandler that Rachel is mistaken. The patients are dying from the virus because the vaccine is ineffective. He proposes extracting plasma from Beatrice's blood and administering it directly to the patients as a last-ditch effort to save them. Despite the risks, Beatrice agrees to donate her blood, even though it leaves her significantly weakened. Rachel receives Foster's test results, revealing the cause of her abnormal reaction. Foster is pregnant, a fact Chandler immediately relays to Green. Green is permitted to visit his ailing partner as her condition deteriorates. Rachel blames herself for the deaths of the patients, but Toit's suggestion proves equally fruitless. Beatrice's plasma has no effect. Chandler. He also blames himself for the situation and gives permission for the medical team to end the patient's jury. To do it, he prepares syringes with a euthanasia solution, but Rachel bursts into the isolation ward claiming to have found the source of the problem. Rachel uses the Arctic strain of the virus as a decoy to lure the active virus away from the patient's immune systems. No one believed Lee's weakened patients could be saved, but hours later their conditions improve dramatically and they begin to recover miraculously. Rachel even manages to save Foster's unborn child, who is likely to be born with a stable immunity to the virus. Rachel is most thrilled by the realization that the formula she developed is not just a vaccine. It can also cure those who are already infected and in critical condition. With this groundbreaking news, the Nathan James rushes home, and everyone aboard hopes to reunite with their families. Meanwhile, Jed struggles to pick up a signal to call for help. He, his grandchildren, and Dorian have contracted the virus, and their condition worsens with each passing hour. All crew members receive the vaccine, ensuring they can safely disembark and assist the infected. However, a new problem arises. Command is unable to establish contact with factories capable of mass-producing the cure. Satellite images reveal that one of the bases they were counting on has been completely destroyed. Jed tries to evacuate his family from the city, but they are denied passage due to their visible symptoms of infection. Desperate, the old man decides to force his way. Through ramming the barricade with his car, Nathan James receives a signal from an unknown source offering assistance and promising the resources necessary to produce the cure. Chandler contacts the sender, and the screen lights up with the face of Emmy Granderson, the only surviving government official now serving as acting leader. The Marines land in Baltimore and are greeted by surviving police officers. After scouting the area, Green reports to the commander that everything has been checked, and a second group led by Chandler approaches the dock. Granderson also arrives to welcome the guests. None of those present notice that they are being watched through a rifle scope from the rooftop of a high-rise building. Driving through the city, the Marines witness dozens of weakened and sick people, along with destroyed and burned out homes. However, the neighborhood where Granderson takes them is starkly different, a pristine enclave of luxury buildings. Untouched by the epidemic, Rachel informs Granderson that they have a cure for the deadly disease. Surviving top scientists of the world applaud Dr. Scott's achievement, leaving her colleagues in the lab. Chandler sets out to search for his family in a quarantine center for the infected. He finds his children and father, but his wife is missing. She died just short of the cure's arrival. Rachel begins to suspect that the tragedy is far from over. Granderson declares that the vaccine will never be made available to the general public. She asserts that only she will decide who is worthy of protection from the disease and who should be allowed to perish to make the world cleaner. This is where the series ends.